Hello and welcome to the Film Ireland podcast, celebrating filmmaking, storytelling and cinema across the island of Ireland. Today we partner with Words Across Europe to welcome Johnathan Young. He's the executive producer at May 1 and former VP of Original Programming and Production at HBO Central Europe. Words Across Europe is an innovative paid programme that provides participants with a deep understanding of the broader industry landscape and the confidence to navigate successful writing for television. And what's most exciting is it takes place completely in VR. Johnathan is one of the industry experts and guest speakers involved in the programme. To learn more about Words Across Europe and how to apply, visit wordsacrosseurope.ie. So we met on Words Across Europe, so it's lovely to get a chance to chat again.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for inviting me.
We're delighted to have you. I was wondering first, so if you could tell me the overview of May 1, and then what I'm going to do is go back into the journey to get there, if that's okay.
Okay. So May 1 is a very tiny entity. It's myself and my HBO producing partner, Ioanina, Pavel. And we came together, I think, about 5 years ago. She used to be the translator for the scripts we had at HBO Europe. We were always fascinated because we would be very excited by a script, and then the Romanians would say, "Oh yeah, but it's not as good in Romanian as it is in English." Like, what's happening here? And it was because Ioanina's English is so good. You know, she's a great translator, and she loves scripts, and she was bringing extra value to it. So I met her, and I talked to her about scripts and TV, and she's obviously passionate about TV. And then a job opportunity came up within HBO, so she joined us at HBO as a script editor and then became a producer very quickly. So she had 5 years experience as a producer at HBO in Romania. I was working across the whole of Central Europe. I was working in Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary, and Romania. But I was focusing on Romania after COVID because travel became more difficult and we had more physical shows on the go in Romania. So I developed a kind of curiosity about doing more work in Romania. And when HBO finished, we had some scripts that we took to Netflix, and one of them they liked particularly, called Subterrane, which we then made for Netflix as May 1. And so May 1 now is developing material for premium drama focused on bringing something of Central Europe to an international audience. That's really our ambition. You know, Subterrane proved that there's an international audience for Romanian content. It was in the top 10 in 70 countries, and which is pretty good considering it went out just after Christmas, and there was an enormous competition within Netflix. And so it did really, really well. And we want to do more of that. It could mean Romanian language in Romania if the broadcasters are there, or it could mean bringing English or German, for example, stories to Romania, or it could even mean bringing Romanian stories to England or Germany. It really depends. We've got a bit of each, and that's what we're up to.
God, that sounds so exciting. But we'll get back there, and I want to go right back to the beginning. Did I read this correctly? Did you begin your career as a runner on EastEnders?
That's right. Yeah. You did. I don't know where you got that from. Yeah, I started on EastEnders. I actually started before it was transmitted. I started on EastEnders on the 31st of December, and the show went out, I think, in the middle of February. So we were working on a show. We had no idea whether it was going to work at all. It was my first TV. I'd worked in commercials a little bit before then, but it was really fascinating. And and of course, almost instantly, it was a big hit. And everything changed. It was very exciting. Yeah.
Could you tell me about your journey from there to here? Like, we'll do little increments.
Yeah,
sure. Dig in as you go, because I just think to be in the world of big international streamers doing these huge level shows to humble beginnings. Like, I love to kind of like pull that out.
How does that happen? I worked in commercial. I wanted to work in film and TV. Didn't know a lot about the industry. I didn't have any connections with the industry in my family, but I had enjoyed working in the theatre at university, and this is a relatively closed world, I felt, and I thought there would be many more opportunities, which indeed is the case. It's just a bigger industry. And I just wrote to everybody I could get my hands on, and I got a letter back from a commercials company. They were looking for a runner. So I did 18 months with them. And during that time, I realized that the commercials in the creative side of the commercials industry, which is what I was really interested in, was the agencies, not the production companies. And so I was in the wrong bit of the business. And if I wanted to get into the creative side, then I needed to really go to the BBC and try and work my way, which is at the time I wanted to direct, onto the BBC's directors course. So that's what I did. I applied to the BBC in various different forms, eventually got a job in the drama department, and the first thing I did was EastEnders. And I think that was 84. And then in 1990, I was a runner. I was a first AD. No, but not. Yeah, I was a first AD, but I was a AFM, what they called an AFM, and then a AD, location manager. I was in the production department, and I got onto the director's course in 1990. And then I started directing on Brookside with Mal Young, who was actually introduced me to Words Across Europe in 1994, I think. And then I had 3 or 4 years directing, but it was during the directing that I realized that the most interesting bit of the process for me was kind of before and after the director gets involved. The development of the scripts and the post-production. Of course, directors are involved in post, but not as involved as in delivering the show as the producer. And that directors aren't really involved in the script process in most returning TV. They come onto a show once the script's been commissioned. And the process of getting a script commissioned is the thing that takes an enormous amount of time and effort, development, and that was also what I wanted to do. So I managed to get a move from directing EastEnders to producing EastEnders, which was I was one of a team of 3 producers on EastEnders, and the first show I did as the sole producer was Casualty. And then, funnily enough, Mal Young at that came from Brookside to run the BBC Dramas department. So we already knew each other. And I worked together with Mal was my exec when I did Casualty, which I did for 18 months. And then I left, I went to Channel 4 and worked on the commissioning side, which was super.
Is there an element of, okay, this is like a small pool of people and there's only a small amount of jobs, so the way to progress is to move, and that's a normal thing? Or is there an element of competition that you're sort of moving to the competition? I suppose their audiences would be quite different.
You mean the Channel 4?
Yeah, taking that leap. Because you went back then.
I think it's to do with relationships that you build up, to be perfectly honest. I think that there's lots of ways into the business, and you have to try lots of ways to get opportunities, but very quickly it becomes about the relationships that you build up. Of course, your credits count for something, but your credits and your relationships are very closely related, to be perfectly honest, because if you've worked on a show that you've enjoyed, you'll get on well with the people on that show and you'll want to repeat the experience. And that's how I ended up at Channel 4. I knew the guy who was the head of drama at Channel 4. We'd worked together before, and he was in the process of developing series. That was really the thing. Channel 4 hadn't made series before, and they wanted a series person to come in and really focus on the series. And so we made North Square and Teachers were the 2 shows that I commissioned when I was at Channel 4. So yeah, but I think very few jobs in my experience are advertised and then you go through the process that they tell you is the official way of getting into the industry. I mean, those are great jobs to get if you can get them, but the reality is, in my experience, most people pretty much are crewed up, and then for some reason somebody drops out and they need someone at very short notice, and then they ring around their friends and they say, I need a director to start next week, do you know anyone? All my people are booked up, and they say, well, you should give Johnathan Young a break, I enjoyed working with him. And that's what happens, to be honest. So it's really a question of, and I know why you're asking, it's a question of developing your relationships, building your contacts, and when you find people that you enjoy working with, hang on to those relationships.
In terms of Channel 4, does your role change? So you would have been on more so soaps and long-running series in BBC, and then moving across to sort of Teachers would be that prime time drama comedy.
Yes, I was also looking after Brookside and Hollyoaks, so I had one foot in the long-running camp and another foot developing long-running shows, and it was a process that was, funnily enough, it's not so very different from the job we do in Romania, in that at the time Channel 4 had a reputation for really doing high-end drama, and we wanted to make series, a particular kind of series that we'd seen. BBC had already made This Life, and it was a super big success. And we wanted to make that kind of show. We wanted to make a show that had many of the elements of a soap. And remember, soap at the time was super hot. This was a time when soap was like Big Brother meets, dancing, but Strictly Come Dancing.
I'll always remember those evening sessions of Hollyoaks, and they were
Yes.
so salacious and like, oh,
Yes.
this not being on a tea time.
Oh yeah, I mean, EastEnders won the. This was the year before I started as a producer on EastEnders, but EastEnders won the drama BAFTA. I mean, it was people were recognizing that soap had real quality, and it was partly recognizing that there was real quality in soap, but it was also recognizing the importance of acknowledging that a show that gets a very big audience probably has some quality. It's not easy to get a really big audience. And I think there's an assumption that because there's a big volume of soap, it must be easy. It's actually really hard to sustain those stories. And it's really hard to get a big audience, a mass audience to your shows. Really, really hard.
As well, your audience is like, it's character driven in so many ways. So they become really loyal to those characters. So there's like if you do something wrong or if a character isn't behaving in that way, I'm sure there's like hell to pay.
They own the characters. The audience own the characters. It's very funny. I was at Edinburgh TV Festival, and Dean Sullivan, who played Jimmy Corkill in Brookside, was there in the audience, and it was talking about soap and the impact of soap and the kind of stories that we were doing. And the conversation switched to Brookside, and they were talking about a Brookside story with real passion. And Dean stood up and he said, "Look, I played Jimmy Corkill. Guys, calm down. It's not real." And then the audience went, "It may not be real to you, but it's real to us." We know you're not Jimmy Corkill, but Jimmy Corkill is real. You have to understand that. And I was like, that is so true. These characters are real. When Brookside did the story with Anna Friel, people really empathized with that, and it changed their lives. People say it changed my life. Beth Jordache was real for people. You can't just say it's not real. It's very, very real. And I think that this was a time when soap was the realest television. I think when Big Brother came along, and the reality shows, Susan Boyle, somehow they became more real than soap. They took soap's place as creating characters. Well, they're not creating, they're real people, but they became characters that kind of connected directly with people. But before Big Brother, it was soap, and it was a real golden age of soap. And they were also, it's the quickest way to tell stories, to get stories on screen. Because with soap, the response time from seeing a story in the public domain to getting it on screen is much faster in soap than you can do it in any other medium. And you can also take stories that are quite hard hitting and quite hard to swallow and sell them to a mass audience because people had already invested in the characters. And if you were starting from scratch, it would just become an issue, and it would be about an issue. And that's when the stories are perhaps less satisfying. But if it's about Beth Jordache, or if it's about Jimmy Corkill, or if it's about Grant Mitchell, then it's not so much an issue story. It's about a character I know and love, but it enables people to engage in that issue in a way that they couldn't otherwise. So
just while we're on soap, because I know we'll move on then, but I do think also it serves such a huge purpose, and then it's a training ground for the entire industry, like a learn by doing example for all the writers that go through the mill to see the practicalities of it.
That's very, very true. I think that there's the physical process of actually writing a lot of stuff, but I think even more important, there's the audience feedback. There's no hiding in soap. If you write a show and it's not transmitted for 18 months or 2 years, by that time you've moved on, and if it isn't quite as successful as you hoped, then you've kind of already said goodbye to it because you've moved on. In soap, you put a story out there, it's pretty immediate whether it worked or not. And if it worked, it's fantastic. And if it didn't work, then you need to change tack really fast. So I think that's where people really learn. It's in the dynamic feedback from the audience, and there's no hiding from the audience.
I can imagine the amount of like character arcs and prep and people that you're overseeing on all of these like big engines in their
Yeah.
own right. What's your day to day like then when you're in Channel 4, like in terms
Oh, well,
of
in
schedule?
Channel 4. So in Channel 4, I was the commissioning editor. So I wasn't sitting in the room doing storylines. I would receive a story document and I would be asked for feedback on that, but I would get that document once a month and it would take a couple of days to read it and process and then feedback in a phone call. And then I'd watch the episodes that they came through and I'd feedback. But because of the speed of the turnaround, it was very, very rare that I would say something needed to be re-edited or anything like that. It wasn't that kind of producing. It was much more like, I think you need to be careful. This story is getting, you're running it too long. People are going to get tired of it. I'm beginning to get bored. Something like that. How much longer do you think it's got left in it? And they might say, well, we thought maybe 6 months. And I'd say, you know what? I think maybe you should try and condense it to 3 or 4 if you possibly can. That kind of conversation. And they may or may not disagree with me, but it was very much, it was a very established machine in Brookside, and Hollyoaks. Phil Redmond ran a fantastic team, and so it was generally a very collaborative relationship. And then the developing of the new shows was, in fact, much more time consuming. That was about developing relationships with the production companies, developing relationships with the writers, asking the question, what is a Channel 4 series? What does the audience expect? How can we define ourselves? It was a lot about the brand. How can we make a show that is distinctively Channel 4 and still will get a big enough audience to justify? So it's going to have to look a bit like other shows. It's going to have high stakes and beginning, middle, and end. It's going to have attractive characters and all that. And what can we do that hasn't already been done, that is fresh and yet familiar enough to get a mainstream audience? So a lot of those conversations.
And is there any times like, I mean, you're probably getting complete 110% right all like most of the time, but was there any sort of like beats of that where like audiences didn't react well or when this goes against the grain? Or was there anything that sort of surprised you on your time there that, or like any outliers even?
Well, I thought that North Square was a really good show. It was a really high quality show, and it was also liked by the press, and it had a fantastic cast. It didn't get quite the audience that we wanted, and in the end, we probably concluded that people just don't really like lawyers enough. And that being said,
Why?
this life worked fantastically well, but that was about them at home, or maybe we just. I don't know why it didn't quite deliver on all the elements that were there. And it wasn't just me that liked it. I mean, lots of people really, really liked it. But if you compare that to Teachers,
Yeah.
Teachers was people just loved the idea of teachers being a bit stupid. I think because we've all seen our teachers and looked up to them, respected them, and kind of wondered what they do when they're not teaching. And it was really people just that central concept was quite good fun. And Tim Lone, who created the show, his wife was a teacher, so I think it would add quite a lot of authenticity in it.
And is that disappointing as a commissioner? I know it's so disappointing as a viewer when you get really invested in a show and then it's gone after a season and you're like, oh, I love these characters. What am I going to do?
I know. Yeah, I know. And there's a lot of that about now. I mean, it's hard. It's very hard to have a show that warrants a second season right now because people are really interested in attracting new audiences, and it's difficult. It's a difficult time for right now for shows to get second seasons for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, but in Channel 4 then, when was the time when you knew, because you went back to BBC Drama, or were you kind of working between the two in the
I left Channel
2010?
4. Oh, there were Channel 4 that I then went into an independent production company called Box TV. And that was set up by the guy who was the head of drama at Channel 4. So he left and invited me to go with him, which was great. I loved Channel 4, but at the same time, it felt like, it felt like a changing regime. It felt like it was time for someone else to come in, and these programs need this creative refresh. But I don't mean programs. I mean, well, I suppose I do mean program. I mean schedules, personnel. There's a value in continuity, and there's also a value in refreshing. And I think it was time for Channel 4 to refresh, and probably time for me to leave, really, despite the fact that I was really enjoying it. And we set up an independent production company. We made a couple of shows, but I got an opportunity to go to Talkback Tens and produce a show for a guy who used to run Brookside. So again, everybody links that. So when I was at Channel 4 commissioning, we brought in a producer on Brookside, a guy called Paul Marquis. And then when I was at Box, Paul was running the bill, and Paul said, "Johnathan, I need a producer." And I was like, okay, so it was it's that sort of cyclical thing about relationships. So I went to do a show called Murder Investigation Team for him.
And is it fun then, having kind of been standing back and watching these things from like more of a distance, to kind of muck in then and kind of
Yes.
get your hands dirty with all the storylines and all the
Yes, exactly. Yeah. It is. I mean, it's fun to do both. It was really, really instructive being at Channel 4 to sit in the strategy meetings. It was really instructive to get close to marketing, to get close to the scheduling department, to get close to the PR and how a broadcaster thinks. And I think if you look at the successful indies in the UK, many of the producers have been in broadcasting, and I think it's not a coincidence. I think it's extremely helpful to have experience of what goes on behind those closed doors. But of course, we're program makers, so it's fun to get on set and watch stuntmen crash cars and stuff like that. So yeah, no, it was fun to get back to that. And I think I had, after MIT, I did the bill, and that was really a great combination of the creative hands-on making of the show, but also being quite close to the network. I worked very closely with Corinne Hollingworth, who was the ITV commissioner, and Corinne had been the producer who first gave me my EastEnders. She was the exec on EastEnders when I first started directing. So there was a sort of cyclical thing there. But because of the volume of the bill, nobody at ITV was across every element of it. So I had considerable freedom to commission stories, and then a great support from Corinne. So that it was brilliant, and a large team. It was a very good show to work on. Yeah.
Then is the move to HBO, is that correct? In 2015?
Not quite. I did 5 years at on the bill, and I wouldn't have left if it hadn't been for the fact the show got cancelled. That was it was part of a change. I think it was really to do with the fact that the bill took up so much of ITV's commissioning budget for independence. To be honest, it was a huge, great commission. It was 96 episodes a year, and the strategy that they had advertised was that they wanted to make more shows themselves, because and they've been extremely successful. ITV Studios, it was a good strategy. It just didn't favour our show, and so that was it. Bill, I went back to the BBC.
Is this the era as well where sort of reality TV is encroaching on?
It is
quite a bit.
Quite a bit. Yeah. It was when the ratings for all the long runners were going down. The Bill's ratings were pretty respectable, but there was a change. It's not just the Bill. You see, Holby's gone now. Brookside's gone. There's a lot of what you were saying actually about the training, as the volume drama has gone down, and those shows that have gone were often those shows that were commissioned in the 80s, which was quite a political time, and the writing and the writers were encouraged to write about contemporary Britain and say their piece. And I think that maybe we started to have reality shows encouraging on that space, and then American shows doing these bigger budget, high-end shows. So people wanting bigger events and needing to spend more money on it, and so thinking maybe it's better to do 6 episodes of a bigger event than 12 episodes of a lower budget show. I think that was probably what was happening.
God, that's such a like it is such a loss as well because
It's a loss, but here's the thing: the audience changes and the medium changes. If you think about the 2000s, what was actually driving the change was cable. It was HBO. It was and when the audience's viewing habits change, when there's a new, essentially almost a new medium, it's bound to change. And this is, over a career of 40 years, I've seen some changes. Now we're in a situation that's really, YouTube is the biggest draw on eyeballs, and all the broadcasters that, the streamers are very present in Europe. Often you're reporting to Hollywood, even if you may never meet the Americans who ultimately approve your project. And so you've got that, and then you've got TikTok, and and attention spans being diminished, people living much more in a bubble, people watching programs on their own, far less of a community of people gathering around the TV set. So it changes the way people watch, and you can't pretend otherwise. You can't just sort of say, "Oh, I wish it was 1980." That was then, and this is now.
Yeah, I think that is one of the things, that it was such a communal event. It was such a
Yes,
conversation, and now everyone is at their own pace,
and
their own journey. Like you're in the same household and you're watching TV shows at two different times. And you
yeah,
mentioned the discussion and the social element and everything is like, can't say spoiler or
yeah. I know. It's a shame. It's hard. It's hard to imagine what it would be like not having had TV as a communal experience. And then I suppose you read the Sunday papers about the generation of people who feel that they're isolated and spend all their time online, and you feel, wow, that's a terrible, unexpected situation, because it all seemed so wonderful when the internet first came along, and now I think we're beginning to realize that there's been a price that's been paid, or there is a price that's being paid. And as creative, but we've got AI to contend with. Yeah. So as creative producers, we're still waiting for the AI revolution that is threatened, but it's definitely coming. So that'll be another massive change. Yeah.
and now for your career change. So going from the UK to this bigger market across Europe, what
Yeah,
was
yeah.
that change like? What was the role and
Oh, HBO was the perfect combination of everything, because we were commissioners, but we were also kind of producers. It would depend. Some shows, the market in Central Europe it has not had the time and the money that it has in the UK. So you don't have people with the same level of experience making primetime TV series. I mean, in the UK, there's a lot of really top class producers, a whole generation of people that have had massive international hits on the streamers and stuff. In Central Europe, not. So we had to be really quite involved in the creative process. And at the same time, we were able to sit within the HBO and talk to the bosses and understand what the agenda was, and the commissioning, and deal with the marketing and stuff like that. So it was a job that involved literally all the skill set from the different things I needed, all of it at HBO.
you were there as the another shift happened, that I think the people starting to watch subtitled content.
Yes, that's true. That's true. But it was also a shift to the streamers.
Yeah.
So I think there were two things that were shifting, and I think the two are linked, of course, because Netflix changed everything, and I think the watching of international shows, I think The Killing probably started that off, actually. So that was a little bit before, but that was a BBC Four show. So even then, it was a niche show that became very, very popular. But really, it was Netflix that changed things, because when I started at HBO, we made local content for the local audience. And then when it became apparent that there was a potential international audience for the shows, the whole rationale behind commissioning changed, and the way that success was measured changed. And it changed the approach that we had to take, to the work. And that was to do with HBO, which was a cable company responding to the streaming world, to be honest. And I think it is still responding to the streaming world. I mean, it's literally within the last few months that the company is split in half, and they've split the streaming off from the studios. And they've got this fantastic library. They've got this fantastic brand in HBO. They've got fantastic talent within the company, but they still haven't quite settled down in the face of Netflix. They're not available globally like Netflix is. Making a show for Netflix is terrifically exciting. It really is. When your show goes out and everybody in the world can access it, it's just a really exciting thing as a producer.
Yeah. So and let's go to May 1 then. What was it like? And we got to touch on this, but like Romania as a territory, like I mean, even in terms of post and production, it is one where it seems to be really growing and evolving massively.
No, I think it comes and goes. I think that there's a more interest, there's more awareness. I mean, Romania has a complex history about which people in the UK know very, very little. And it's really, really interesting to come here and realize how ignorant we are and start to learn, which is what has been fascinating to me about it. It's a little bit more in the public eye now because it's on the border with Ukraine. So there's an awareness that Romania is strategically important. I think when I started at HBO, people would probably say it's right off to the right somewhere, and kind of irrelevant. Now I think the way we look at the map has changed, and people will go, "Oh my God, Romania is really important." Not only that, it's a Latin language and it's surrounded by Slavic languages. It's a bit of it's grown up in a rather unique and not isolated. It's hung onto an identity that it has, while there's been chaos all around it, and there's been chaos within it. But it's got this Romanian identity, which is super interesting, and it's relatively large. I mean, it's smaller than Poland, but it's bigger than all the other countries in Central Europe. So there's a mass of people here. On the other hand, it had the worst time during communism, and it had the biggest amount of ground to catch up, and it's still catching up. So Poland feels really developed now. If you go to Warsaw, Hungary, Budapest, and Prague, they're really dynamic cities. You wouldn't notice a difference. You still see in Bucharest the legacy of communism and the lack of where things weren't developed and where money was spent in the wrong places or stolen. So it's got more ground to catch up, but it is super interesting.
I often think sometimes there's countries that have gone through that do have an interesting relationship with storytelling as well. As would that be?
Yeah, I think that gets into a really quite deep subject, which I am really interested in. The communism the censorship was very, very, very rigorous, and it changed the way people thought. I mean, that was what it was supposed to do, and it was successful. But I think it meant that there was a kind of schism in storytelling. A show like EastEnders, what we were talking about before, where our job as writers and producers was to provoke thought, was to present untold stories to the public, was to put a spotlight on issues that we were passionate about, that we felt were being ignored. Literally everything that I've just said would be absolutely unthinkable in Ceausescu's Romania. So people couldn't express themselves in that way. I mean, and so they're in a sense that what they found a kind of secret language to express themselves. So I think that storytelling is still relatively this kind of storytelling that we are used to in the UK, where there's been a continuity of storytelling, and we all look back on the previous generation and build on what they did. That hasn't happened here. So it's kind of starting again in some ways. But of course, historically, there's a rich history of storytelling. But I think people are still working out how to tell contemporary stories and what the contemporary Romania story is, which is partly why it's so interesting being here.
And in terms of Day One and your ethos, I think what's very interesting is I had a quote pulled that where are my notes, and it was the to that it's almost I'll get the subtext of it. I had the quote, but I've so many notes that that it was about enabling the artists and the creatives and like having like the crew kind of band together to tell the story.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that, I'm not Romanian, but I can hopefully give people some hints about how to take their stories and make them more accessible to an international audience. So there are something, you need we need everything we do with May 1 that's talking about Romania needs to be authentically Romanian. That's very important. But some of the things which are authentically Romanian just don't translate because we haven't had that experience of communism. We haven't had that experience of having to find ways to express yourself without actually literally telling people what you think. And the weird thing about it is you have that, but at the same time, Romanians are extremely emotionally intelligent and articulate. So it almost seems to me to be mad that this country, where people love to talk and have so much to say, live for 45 years under a regime where you can't talk. So I'm very curious. I'm very curious about that. But the thing that we can bring is this, that with our background and the synthesis between Ioanina, who's Romanian, and myself, who's from the UK but interested, is to hopefully encourage people to think about ways of telling stories that can travel beyond the borders. That's what we're really interested in doing.
What's on your slate now, and how do you go about kind of discovering the stories that you want to tell and the people that you want to tell it with?
Well, you find, in the same way that any broadcast in development person would, you go to the theatre, you watch what's on TV, you meet a lot of people, you talk, you try and see if there's common ground, and then you see what might interest you and what might interest them, and you look for synergy. And if you meet people and you spark and you're going like, wow, that's so interesting. I would never ever have thought about that, but what an interesting story. Then you try and turn it into something. And you read the news and you watch it on TV. We had a meeting today with a producer who makes a very successful kind of, I don't know if I suppose it's a soap opera here called Las Fabines. They do 80 hours a year. And he said, the absurdity of day-to-day life in Romania is endless. We are never going to run out of story. And I think that's part of what's so fascinating is what, the sort of some of those slightly bonkers things that happen. And they're sometimes to do with the fact that under the communism, to actually get anything done, you had to bypass the system. So you had to find ways to bypass the system. The system was essentially set up to frustrate you from doing anything. And so if you wanted to do something, you had to find ways around it. So they're very good at finding workarounds. And it's within that world of the workaround that the slightly crazy, absurd things happen that you go, whoa, that's super interesting. And they find that very entertaining about themselves as well.
But that's it as well. You can bring that fresh eye where you're like, actually, that's a very funny point, and that will like resonate really well with an international audience. And I suppose as well, when you're so used to going, this is content only for our region, how will it be abroad? What are the things that people
Yeah.
and what are the things that they don't?
Yeah, well, one of the things that we talk a lot about is how we know what the preconceptions are about Romania in the West. In order to make our stories accessible to a Western audience, we kind of have to lean into that to a point, and then subvert it. And we don't want to play up to a cliche or reinforce a prejudice, but it's the prejudice. We need to make that work for us, and then tell the audience that, "Hi, I've got you. You know, you have to wake up. You are institutionally racist, whether you like it or not. We all are in some way because but we don't know it because we're not challenged by it. And if we can get people to go, do you know what? I fell for that, and now I'm looking at people through different eyes. That would be amazing. That's what we're trying to do to some extent.
It's quite satisfying. I suppose we've our own version here, and it's the paddywhackery.
Yes,
Like, oh, sure, the shillelagh and the flat.
I know. What an Irish friend of mine used to call diddly dee. I don't know if you use that expression or if that's an inappropriate expression.
No, I think that's a very specific to your friend experience. I mean, you just call it
Yeah, but
paddywhackery. Yeah.
what he meant was, I know you think because I'm Irish, it's going to be like that, but I am capable of telling other stories as well, Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
we lean into it. Like a few bob, sure. Like Irish
yeah,
Heritage is
yeah,
on Netflix.
yeah. But the thing
I'll be
is,
happy enough to watch. I did watch that.
but you lean into it, don't you? Because that's what gets the audience, and then you kind of subvert it. I mean, I just think back to the films that we watched in the 80s, like Local Hero did that brilliantly, or Gregory's Girl. It was taking something Scottish and to some extent playing up to a stereotype and then seducing the audience into falling in love with the characters and looking at the world through different eyes and empathizing with the characters on their side. That's really what you want to try and do. That's what we want to try and do for sure.
And in terms of storytelling, so you we got to listen to your brilliant chat on Words Across Europe, and I was wondering if you could talk to us about your work on that scheme.
Onwards across Europe. Well, I mean, I was asked, Mal Young put me in touch with Natalie. Natalie pitched the concept to me, and I talked to her about a way that we had incited writers on a scheme called Serialize that runs out of Berlin. And she thought that sounded kind of interesting. And I think she then took that and fleshed it out into the Words Across Europe scheme. And then while she was doing that, we had a few conversations where she would run by where she was at, and I'd feed back, and but essentially, I think it's Natalie's entirety. I don't actually know because I wasn't there when Natalie put the program together, but I know that Natalie and I had a conversation at the very beginning, and what we've ended up with is something that I recognize as being a really, really good scheme.
Yeah, it's fabulous.
And so I came on board. She invited me to come on board and do a talk, and of course, I'm really happy to do that. And it's really fascinating. I think some of it was came out of COVID. The idea of trying to be creative by remote, because it is actually a really difficult thing to do. It's the one thing during COVID that we missed was the writers' room, and I think that she's done from everybody I've spoken to who's done Words Across Europe, she's done a really amazing job of finding a way, or at least the scheme has done an amazing job of finding a way of making a virtual writer's room work.
Yeah, and one of the great things as well is the pitching element to get feedback and to chat to brilliant creative minds like yourselves with your ideas, and then have that instant feedback and thoughts on it to hone it, because it's a lovely safe space, but you do get to create real work.
Yes, I know. It's very impressive what people have come up with in a relatively short space of time, quite often without having met each other. I mean, I don't know. Did you meet face to face?
No. I
No,
think that was the
no,
first.
no,
Yeah.
no.
With the
We
with the
did,
VR headsets, and
yeah,
coming up with ideas that are again like international ideas, and there's not
yes,
one person from the same country in the same room when you're
yeah,
coming up with ideas. And I think that outside perspective just gives such valuable insight
yes,
into
yeah,
creating something that makes sense internationally.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I've thought a lot about this because of the times in which we live, and also being in Romania that had a fairly nationalistic 1930s, and about this issue of diversity, which I think is the most important thing in creativity. And I think it's, where I see the diversity, the richness of a melting pot, that's when interesting things happen. It's why America was so successful. I think generally the countries that have been most successful, it really have embraced diversity. That's the essence of creativity, in my opinion. And where I saw Romania become very undiverse historically under communism, creativity died. I mean, literally, I was reading a Romanian from that era who was talking about the diversity of the Bucharest and creative diversity in the 1930s, and he said, and then we were taken over by Moscow and nothing. And it literally with nothing. You cannot be creative in a sterile environment, and you need rich different opinions. Of course, at the same time, you need a consensus about what is a story, and so I think that's presumably in how they cast people. People come into it with some experience, and you share an understanding of of an audience and an appreciation of an audience and what makes a story work. But you being challenged and meeting, that's of course why I wanted to do the HBO job, because I wanted fresh challenges. I wanted to meet different people. I wanted to be surprised. I wanted to be taken on a journey that I hadn't been on before. Yeah, and I still do.
Do you have anything we should keep an eye out for the future? Do you have anything in the works that is on the
Nothing that
or?
I would really want to pitch at this stage. No, I mean beyond what I said at the very beginning, which is our slate. We have a small number of Romanian language shows for Romania, but at the moment those are relatively hard to sell. It would be great to do more shows like Subterrane. We have a small number of shows that are about Brits or Germans in Romania that tap into the history and the politics and the geography because it's on the border of Ukraine, and the Germans were here for a long, long time, 800 years, because there was a German community in Transylvania. And we have a small number of shows about the Romanian community in the UK and one in Hamburg that we've just got ready to send that now. And I think I would love to make a show like that because the Romanian actors are so good. And I think to get it has to feel like a British show. But if you could introduce some elements of the Romanian diaspora, Romania has the biggest diaspora. But in this, I imagine it's quite common to Ireland in terms of its perception of itself as a country where many people have left. And created worlds for themselves outside. That's the case with Romania. Over 16% of the population of Romania live outside the country. It's the highest in Europe. And there are Romanians in every country in Europe, but certainly in Britain, but not understood and not acknowledged. And they tend to keep their head down. That is very much in the culture. You don't draw attention to yourself. It's a lesson from communism. They have an expression, he who bows his head avoids the sword, which actually comes from the Turks, from when the Turks were here. But, they keep your head down. And there's another expression here, which I love, which I was told by Ioanina actually once when I was getting all irate at the BBC. She said, you have to learn to mă cubota, which means to move forward on your stomach.
We have one called tall poppy syndrome, and it's the tallest poppy gets chopped down. Like you keep level, yeah. We have our own version.
But when they first tell you that, you think, no, that's not right. You should stand up. And they go, you can try it, but not under Ceausescu. It won't last long. And they have a fantastic approach to survival and many, many strategies for surviving, which is completely fascinating because they have had to in a way that we never have in the UK. We've been extremely lucky with our history and the fact that we're protected by the sea.
Well, we haven't.
I know, because you've got us.
So we can hold it. That's why we're so funny, because we can't ever say, sure, after you left, we had the church in, so we were just screwed. Yeah, but like loads of that would apply for us as well.
That's funny enough.
The home rule from home rule to Rome rule was one of our things.
Right.
So we'd have all those. So that's funny. Like even when you were saying that, we'd have versions of them for ourselves for that.
Yeah.
But yeah. But anyway,
what they say here, which amuses me with this sort of fatalism, when they talk about the difference between Romania and the rest of Central Europe's experience under communism, they said, yeah, the thing is, they have the Red Army. We did it to ourselves. That's pretty nihilistic, but they sort of say it with a smile on their face. It's true that, of course, they can't blame anybody else. So yeah, that's the similarity. Yeah.
At the darkest, but it sounds like so rich in terms of there's so much stuff to mine. So I think we'd really be looking for and that we'd have such a connection to it. But there's a diaspora in Ireland. Like there's quite substantial.
There's a Romania. I know there is. We have it. We actually do have a show that we want to take to our friend at RTE. So we'll see whether that everything ever pops up. But no, I know there's a Romanian diaspora, and the thing about the Romanians is they integrate very well, despite the press and the publicity, the negative press and publicity. So you don't know that somebody's Romanian necessarily. They pick up languages very, very fast. They just integrate, very well. So you can have a bigger diaspora than you think.
Okay, totally. Thank you so much. Well, I'll keep an eye out for that RT show. That sounds fabulous.
Yeah. Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed.
Brilliant, and thanks so much for chatting with us.
No, and good luck with your projects, and good luck to the whole. If the people from the team are listening, good luck to all of them, because it was really a privilege to listen to the pitches. They were really, really good, and it's exciting times.
Fabulous.
Terrific. Thank you very much.
And thank you so much for listening. So make sure to rate and subscribe on Film Ireland wherever you get your podcasts, or head on over to filmireland.ie where you can subscribe to our newsletter.